just started reading this. And it's dense, man. This is a dense fucking book.
It's a bouillon cube.
Yeah.
I packed as much as I could in there. You know, it's a very well packed suitcase of stuff.
Yeah, and there were all these artists that you wanted to include but couldn't include.
Yeah. You know, I thought, well, maybe in a year or two there will be a big compendium about Jimmy Swinnerton if we're lucky. So I decided to X him out of the book. But yeah, he would have fit. You know, I mean, it depends upon what your definition of screwball is, and I think everybody has their own idea of what that is. You know, high speed, over the top, but I think it's more than that too. You know, I think it's a sensibility. It's not a form, and you might think of it as a genre, but I really think of it more as a sensibility. It's, to me, it's when, at least in comics, but you see it in film and music too, it's when the artist is playing with absurdity and nonsense in a way that actually reveals some kind of underlying foundational truth about the world. But it's fun. It's not like existentialism, you know. It's not like reading Jean-Paul Sartre, who may be saying more or less the same thing that a screwballist is saying. The world is absurd. When you read a screwballist, it's fun, you know. And
does Will Elder count?
Oh shit, yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. Don't you think so?
Oh, I mean, I think so.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, this book is basically explaining the lineage of Mad, of Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder and all those guys. How did, you know, it's like, that just didn't happen out of a vacuum, right? So where did they get their ideas? Who inspired them? And, you know, it's just like tracing back from generation to generation and discovering who influenced who. So that narrative is in the book. It's not overt, but if you read the book from chapter 1 to the last chapter, you do get the sense of a tradition, or I wouldn't say a tradition, I would say an approach to comics being passed on from one generation to the next. You know, Rube Goldberg kind of breaks out. He's influenced by Frederic and Eugene Zimmerman, who start the book. And Rube Goldberg kind of breaks out, and he becomes the first millionaire cartoonist. He's a huge success. He's so successful that they run around 1915, 1916. His salary becomes newspaper news. Not his work, but how much he makes. And this inspires a whole new generation of cartoonists. Real different story from today, huh? But I mean, you know, there were only so many slots, just like there are today, for at least back then, for newspaper cartoonists. And so most of these people who had dreams of becoming millionaire cartoonists, being syndicated comic strip artists, didn't make it. And then, you know, you read about someone like Chester Gould, who I think has a sense of the absurd, and Dick Tracy. I mean, look at those wild villains. He tried so hard to become a comic strip artist. I mean, he created strip after strip after strip. The Dick Tracy Museum is full of his misfires. You know, the things he would submit and they get turned down, and he would do it again. Did you experience that when you were starting out? Did you have to go through a lot of rejection?
Are you kidding? Absolutely. I'm still going through rejection. Every day I'm persecuted. But do you think that the comics that are in the Screwball book were the kind of comics that Harvey Kurtzman would have been reading before he started Mad?
Absolutely, yeah. Not all of them, because the book covers a wide swath of time from about 1880 to about 1950. So Kurtzman would have been definitely reading Rube Goldberg. And as a matter of fact, Goldberg had two characters who were identical twins called Mike and Ike. And the gag being that Mike was, and Paul Buell said this, not me, Mike was Irish and Ike is Jewish, and yet they look identical. They dress the same. There was some similarity in the Irish costume to the Jewish costume, with the black suit and the black bowler hat back then. But anyway, Kurtzman, it's said in his biography that he used to draw comic strips with sidewalk chalk, and he had two of his own characters, identical twins, and that he was, you know, going off Rube Goldberg's idea. So he was influenced by Goldberg. And there's another book. It's a collection of Smokey Stover comics. It's not very good. I don't recommend getting it. And for some reason, it's outrageously high on the collector's market, like $200 or $300.
Yeah.
But it has the reason, what's interesting is it has an introduction by Harvey Kurtzman.
Oh.
It's only one page. But he says Smokey Stover influenced the idea of sticking in all those background gags and all those outrageous puns in Matt. They were definitely consciously riffing on that and picking up on that. So yeah, he read some of that stuff and picked up on it. This is the amazing thing I found. One of the many amazing things I found, Noah, in researching this book. I researched it for years, and I discovered that if you just keep going back and back, the American newspaper comic strip kind of comes along in about 1883 or 84, 85. I don't know what the first one was. But just prior to that, there was this explosion of comics in American magazines around 1876, 1877. And that's when you have Puck getting started, right?
Yeah.
And I remember reading on Facebook that you'd gone to OSU and looked up some Puck stuff. I was really proud that you did that. I was like, yeah, that's a great thing to do. I did the same thing. I went to the library here. They have a collection in their rare books room. You got to give them a little slip of paper, and you got to wait for a while. And then they bring you one book, with gloves on, and you have to look at it in a special seat, and just have the best time reading that stuff. Yeah. And when I realized lots of stuff, but one of the things is it wasn't just political cartoons. I always thought it was, but it's not, right? I mean, that was the center stage. Those big political cartoons, the color lithograph in the center of the magazine and the back cover. But the black and white stuff, a lot of that was humorous. Mm-hmm. It was just observations about wacky shit going on or crazy ideas that these guys would come up with that I think have a screwball flavor to them. They're already reaching for that sense of the absurd in 1880. You can see it.
Yeah, I was lucky that I lived next to the Billy Ireland because I had access to so much amazing stuff there. And that's where I met my partner, Amy, because she was working there. So I got a chance to see like that, the Puck experience. I went there one time to visit her, and they were putting together an art show where they, in one of the glass cases, they were going to have some Puck volumes open. And so I got to go back with just the little gloves on and just flip through those bound volumes of these Puck magazines and newspapers. And it's like, I'm looking at stuff that like the Cowboys would have looked at. Like, this is how
that's right.
Like Arizona was like just like a row of like saloons at this time. And like I get a chance to like look at these amazing comics, and you can see the indentation from the printing plates.
Yeah.
The newspapers, like the weight.
Yeah, it really does feel like you're taking a trip back in time. If you look at on page 46 of the Screwball book, there's this photo right here of Eugene Zimmerman. Now he started out in Puck, but if you look closely, he's not at a drawing board. He's at a lithographed stone. And that's how they did the color cartoons for Puck. They were drawn directly on the stone with grease crayons by the artist, and then they would go through this incredible process where they would take the master stone and make duplicates of it for the different colors. And so when you see those lithographs, those are the closest thing you can get to original art, because there is no original art for these cartoons. It was drawn on these stones. I mean, if you could even find the stones, they would just have these crayon marks on them. I mean, imagine framing that and put it on the wall. It's really neat if you can get hold of an issue of Puck and look at those lithographs, because those are just pulled directly off the surface that the artist himself touched. So I thought that was an amazing photograph. I had to go through hell and high water to get that photograph and get it in the book. There's a museum in Elmira, New York. It's the house that Eugene Zimmerman lived in and worked in, and it's preserved as he left it. And in the on the mantle in the house, there's like this little movie on the internet somewhere where it's like a 3-minute movie about the museum, and I saw in the background this photo. And I saw that it was hand colored.
Yeah.
which I presume it was hand colored by Eugene Zimmerman himself. And I wrote the Horseheads Historical Society, and I said, man, can you please get me a digital image of that photo? And I had to keep asking them and reminding them and reminding them, and I almost gave up, but I tried one more time, and just, pretty please with sugar on top. And a very nice man went over there with his digital camera and snapped it for me. So we have it for the book. I just thought it's so cool, because when are you ever going to see a cartoonist working at a lithographic stone like that back in whenever that was, like 1878, 1880, who knows?
Yeah, I've never seen that. I've never seen that before. That's incredible. What do you think that those photos of the cartoonists, do you think, because they're always dressed up in a suit, do you think they actually did work in their suits, or do you think they took a photo, they dressed up for the photo?
I've wondered that. No, I think they actually did dress up that way. I think it's a reflection of their work ethic. These guys were, they're like you. I mean, you were probably the hardest working man in comics. But back then, I think there was a social ethic, and I think cartoonists regarded themselves as being professional. When I was growing up, if you told people you wanted to be a cartoonist, you're kind of ashamed of it a little bit. But back then, it was hot shit, apparently. So, and in here you have Frederic and Eugene Zimmerman, the two guys that we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
So there you go. So I really do think that they regarded themselves as professionals, and they dressed the part, even if they were working from a home studio.
Yeah, it was a real career back then.
On the other hand, we see photographs of Mark Twain, right, writing in bed. He's in his pajamas and he's laying in bed, all rumpled, smoking a cigar. So maybe that's what these guys did too. Maybe they really did just dress up for the photo.
Yeah, there was when I was at CCS, the Center for Cartoon Studies, I used to go to the movie night that Stephen Bissett would put on every Thursday.
Cool.
And Stephen Bissett is a big time movie buff, so I knew I was going to see something new and interesting, and sometimes it kind of related to comics. And one time I went there and he showed Hell's a Poppin'.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you want to know the kind of stuff that Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder and Jack Davis and stuff were watching around this period. Here's a great movie, and that movie cracked me up. I've never seen anything that wacky before. That was my entrance into screwball comedy, I guess.
Oh, the first 20 minutes or so are just
insane.
Yeah, it's mainline screwball. It doesn't get any screwier on film than that.
Yeah, there's so many jokes in there. There's one that I always think about that cracks me up. Where it's just the two guys are talking, Olsen and Johnson, and this guy comes up and he goes, "Excuse me, would you mind if I took your picture?" And he's got a camera, and they're like, "Yeah, all right." And he just goes up behind him and takes the picture off the wall and walks away.
I researched the movie, and it was based on a very successful Broadway review. And the basic concept is just throw as many gags at the audience as you can. If they don't think something's funny, they will in about a minute, because there'll be 4 or 5 more jokes, and one of those will hit them. And it's jokes by the pound, basically. But the rapid fire manic energy of it gives it also this crazy, mind bending, especially for a modern audience. It's just like, whoa.
Yeah.
You've never seen anything like that. It's wonderful. Yeah. It's liberating to me. It lifts the spirit. And Tex Avery, right? Because I was thinking it might be more likely they were watching the Tex Avery Warner Brothers cartoons, which did come out in the mid 40s, right? And that would have been just a few years before the creation of Mad. And that same screwball sensibility is huge. And Tex Avery and Bob Clampett, of course, and Frank Tashlin, who later went on to become a movie director. All those guys were working at Warner Brothers and MGM, creating these mind-blowing cartoons. So here's the deal with the George Harryman chapter. Instead of trying to do some of the chapters give you a complete overview of the artists and their career, but Harryman, we already have a complete overview in the form of Michael Tisserand's biography. There was a great one by Patrick McDonnell, the guy who does Mutts.
Yeah.
It came out, 20, 30 years ago. And Fantagraphics is reprinted, all the Sundays. So it was like, I think Harryman belongs here. I didn't think I could not leave him out, because to me, it's not that his work is particularly screwball. It incorporates screwball along with so many other things. It elevates screwball it shows you what you can do with that sensibility. So I really wanted him in there, and we reprinted a strip that's never been reprinted. I don't know why. It's called Stumble In, and it is gorgeous. It's Art Spiegelman said it was the most beautiful cartooning he'd ever seen. And so that's what's in the book. It's a 20-page, I think, selection of Stumble In, taken from the Billy Ireland. And the text that I wrote for it isn't in no way an attempt to, give you a biography of Harryman. Instead, it delves into what he was doing when he was drawing that strip and where he was. And this I found fascinating. He was hanging out at the Hal Roach studio, and Hal Roach is the film company that put out the Laurel and Hardy movies and the Our Gang comedies. But when Harryman was there, this is before that stuff started. And they were still doing silence. And Laurel and Hardy were both working there, but they hadn't teamed up yet as a team. They were just doing separate films. Stan Laurel was just working as a writer. And so Harryman was friends with the guy that wrote the title cards. His name was Beanie Walker, and he was a former newspaper man. And so I think Harryman, when he worked in New York City, he worked in the Hearst Art Room, which was notorious for just being like this group of guys, total cut-ups. Mm-hmm. They played pranks on each other all the time, and they just, they had like women's panties strung up for the drapes, and they were, they just did crazy stuff. And I think Harryman missed that, so he winds up at moving to California, and then he was like, he wanted to be around people. So he's working here surrounded by all this creative talent. And if you read Stumble In and you watch the Hal Roach films, and there's been this amazing series that's been released on DVD lately. This thing I love, this particular one, Charlie Chase. And he was a master gag constructionist, and he was there when Harryman was working there. So anyway, the point being, if you compare the movies to the Stumble In strips, Stumble In is obviously silent comedy. It's picking up on that, and it's presenting it to you. The staging, it's not like Crazy Cat where everything morphs and shifts from picture to picture, or it'll be assembled into some beautiful, thing where the sum of the parts is bigger than each individual part. It's just a mind-blowing layout. These are in a grid, a matrix, and it's like they're being shot with a camera from a medium shot. Mm-hmm. And so, they're very static. And so it's like the people are performers instead of characters.
He was influenced by the films.
Yes, absolutely influenced by the movie making craft. And if you think about it, films and comics were born at almost the same instant, and they're both driven by developments in technology, and they both focused a lot on humor in the early days, which was drawn, I think, out of vaudeville and in-person performances. And they had the same problem, which was, how do we take something that's linear and kind of flat, but make people laugh with it? How do we create situations that are funny for people, and what are the techniques to do this with? And so as film becomes more sophisticated, the comics become more sophisticated, and they go back and forth. And some of the same people worked in both industries, such as Milt Gross, who's in the book, the Screwball book. Seagar is really interesting. Have you read any of Seagar's stuff? I know I sent you the Sunday Press book.
Yeah. But that's one of the ones that I just did an interview with Eric Reynolds, and we were talking about Popeye, and that's like one of his favorite strips ever. And I haven't delved into it yet, really. So I'm embarrassed about it. He's like, there's nothing funnier than Popeye. I'm like, I know it. I just haven't gotten there yet. I just finished reading all the Buzz Sawyer comics,
Whoa.
So it takes me back.
Those are beautiful, the Buzz Sawyer comics.
Yeah.
But they don't hold a candle up to Thimble Theater, in my opinion. Because what you get with Seagar is you get the funny shit. You get the incredible cartooning. But this guy was capable of writing a story. Like I mean, it's rare actually to find someone who has the ability to cartoon well, draw well, put it across, but then somehow weave it into a long narrative that is that provides this richness, to the reader of lots of different characters moving through time and space with lots of different dramas and side things happening and I mean, his stories are epic. They go on for weeks, if not months, and that's what's great about Seagar. So the book you got, the Sunday Press book, those are just individual strips until he latches onto this long narrative where they're lost in the desert, and it goes on for I think about 2 years. And so the guy was just, really good. There's so much to say about Seagar. I actually did a little YouTube video about him recently.
Oh, okay.
There should be a book done about the guy.
But what do you think of Bud? What's his name? Bud Sangroff, the guy who took over for him?
Segendorf. Segendorf actually. Yeah. I'm not sure how to say his name.
Yeah, me either.
Well, he didn't actually take over for Seagar. He wanted to. He was Seagar's assistant. Seagar handpicked him. They were living in Santa Monica. Segendorf, I believe, was working in an art supply store, or his sister was. I can't remember which. Anyway, he was about 17, and he becomes this assistant. He's still in high school, this assistant to this great cartoonist who's completely humble about it. And there's this great story in the book about them. About once a week, Seagar would call him at about midnight and say, "It's time." And they would go. There was this long pier near where they lived. They lived near the ocean in Santa Monica, California, and they would tie a rowboat off the pier, and they'd sit in it all night long fishing. But what they were really doing was coming up with stories for the next batch of strips.
Wow.
And so they would talk about it, and they would laugh, and and Bud would be taking notes by the light of the Coleman lantern there. And then they would early in the morning they'd go back to Seagar's house and draw the next like Sunday. And he said that would be done like in an hour. He said the drawing was done so fast because they had already figured out everything that was going to happen. And they were, so they spent enormous amounts of time writing it, but it was drawn really quickly, which I find really telling. I think that's partly why it's so good. But anyway, I like Segendorf's stuff a lot, but the Syndicate instead gave it to other cartoonists like Bela Zabuli, who just did a by the letters number imitation, which had some of the magic, but not really, not at all. It's like Jack Cole. Nobody's been able to copy Plastic Man successfully, in my opinion. I'm sure there's a lot of people that disagree, and no dissing all the great modern artists who've drawn Plastic Man, but it doesn't have that spark to me.
For me, I feel like when I write humor comics, like for when I did Fonte Bukowski, for example, I always felt like the more energy and immediacy I put into the drawing, the funnier it was going to be. If I labored over something that was supposed to be funny, it lost its humor. I had to do it real quick and just try and get the expressiveness in there. But
with Fonte Bukowski, it's like you're performing on paper, because the thing that makes that work is his character. And it doesn't always come through in the dialogue or the plotting. It comes through in how he looks, his facial expressions or his body language. And you do that so well. It's so funny.
Thanks.
Sometimes his body language is saying the opposite of what he's actually saying. And that makes it even funnier.
But I see that a lot in the cartoonists that you selected. Like you don't see there's like an immediacy, like an energy to the work in Screwball comedy,
There is, it's very vital,
and that's the funniest stuff for some reason. Just like
I agree. I mean, like the comics of Milt Gross, they look like they were drawn, just really fast, just scribbled. They weren't. I mean, you probably would know this better than me, but I think that he was a master cartoonist. I think there's lots and lots of lessons that can be learned looking at his stuff. But they don't look like it at first glance. They look like they were just, like the guy was just like on speed or something, or maybe he was like drawing it while he was riding the bus to work or something. He has this loose scrawl to his work. but it's what makes it's part of his style, because the characters are start moving very, very frenetically.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this I call it the comedy of escalation. There's one situation that happens and something goes wrong, and that begins to escalate, and it just gets bigger and bigger. And this is also part of the screwball sensibility. Gross takes it about 5 steps further than anybody else would even think of taking it. So by the end, what starts out is maybe Papa trying to, and this isn't a reference to any particular strip, I'm just making this up, but Papa Feudabaum trying to get ice in the icebox. By the last panel, an entire city has been destroyed. It just like gets bigger and bigger, and that's part of the humor, is the outrageousness of it. But somehow the drawing, that quick drawing adds to it. But then you take someone like Gene Ahern, who did the Squirrel Cage. I'm really curious to know what you think of those when you get to that.
Yeah.
And those are drawn really static. They're very stodgy. There's no energy whatsoever in the line. And yet, to me, they're funny as hell. There's a different dynamic going on in that strip.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that I've never heard of Walter Hoban before. Hey, let me ask you if you've seen this book. I'm kind of curious. Have you seen this? Oh yeah, mine's in good condition still.
Look, mine's autographed.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I love this book. Do you like this book?
I love this book, yeah. And you can, like I was just saying, like any used bookstore you go into that's kind of out of the way, they always have a copy of this.
I know, usually pretty cheap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he self-published.
He self-published this book. For as long as he was alive, you could write to him and get it. And he would sign it. I didn't, though. I got this when I was working at a comic book store in Honolulu, Hawaii. I found this in the back room, and I was like, what the hell is this? And hardware cartoons. Yeah, I took it home, with me, and I started reading it, and I just became completely addicted. I mean, whoever would think that hardware retailing could be so fun and fascinating?
So he owned a hardware store, right?
Yeah, he owned a hardware store.
And there was like a hardware store magazine or something.
Hardware retailer.
Yeah, he came up with a cartoon called Mr. Oswald, and he would just serialize in there for years.
Yeah, for years. And it's really beautiful cartooning, I think.
Yeah.
It's in that grand old style, Bigfoot cartooning. But I mean, Jesus, look how dense this stuff is. There's a lot of shit going on. It kind of reminds me of your stuff, actually, in terms of the balance of narrative and character.
Like there's so many words in there. That's something I always have to fight. Is like, okay, how can I edit this down?
As a drawer, it seems like you think in terms of three dimensions, not a flat plane where you have black and white, in some sort of eye-appealing pattern. I don't think that you see the world that way, as far as I can tell. And that's part of what I love about your work, is there is this dimensionality to it.
That must be it. I got another book I want to ask you about.
You're too modest.
Booty Rogers' memoir, Homeless Bound.
Yeah.
Have you a copy of that?
Yeah, I have it signed too, and it has a Christmas card in it too.
Every copy is signed. What's that about?
Again, I think he self-published it, so he signed them and sent them out to people.
Yeah, that's a really funny book.
It is. Sadly, he doesn't talk much about cartooning in it, though. That's disappointing. But when you get past that, it's full of these, risque stories.
Well, when I first saw Booty Rogers, the book that Craig Yo published.
Yeah.
I thought he was like supposed to be a ripoff of the Al Cap comic, Will Abner. I was what is this? Is this like it's supposed to be like some like Brand X version of Will Abner? Like it
does look like that. Yeah. Screwball. I wanted to. I mean, that's on the surface of it. It's a collection of wacky fun cartoons. But for me, it's so much more than that. It's about making this older material that is off-putting in some ways, in part because of the stereotyping, but also just because it moves at a completely different rhythm than modern comics. It looks different. It was printed by different printing methods, and it comes from a different time period. However, a time period that has a lot in common, increasingly so, sadly, with our time period.
Right.
A time of wars. There was a plague in 1918, 1919, Depression, Great Depression. And, here we are sitting, in social isolation during a plague, and there's apparently a depression, a Great Depression in our country just around the corner, maybe global.
Yeah.
And so back then, I think the humor was a tonic for people. They'd read the headlines and get all bummed out, and then they could get a laugh.
I think that's actually really interesting that there are a lot of similarities, because when I read collections of old comics, like for example, my friend Bruce Simon, Bruce Simon?
I do. What a lovely guy.
He does this book with Ron Avery. Hoo-ha.
Yeah. I picked some up from him recently. They're
great.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And when you read older comics, you really get the history of this country, depending on where you're reading it or what country they're from. And you get the little details of what life was like for people that you would never get anywhere else. Just little things, There was one strip that I read of J.R. Williams where it was about how in the summertime, at a certain point, people in their houses decided they need to move the stoves out of the houses into these outdoor kitchens that they were building in their backyards.
Right.
Because
it was too hot.
Yeah, exactly. And it was about like what a pain in the ass that was.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would have never known that kind of detail about what these people had to go through, just daily life kind of crap, and that there were these people that were cutting out. There was like a frozen pond, and these kids were bummed out because they wanted to go ice skating on it. And these people were cutting big blocks out of it so they could put it in their refrigerator barn.
In their icebox, right?
Yeah, their icebox.
Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, that's what you had to do. There was no refrigerators or freezers,
History curls up through, or seeps through the pores of the newsprint, and the old newspaper comics. So they're well worth reading just for that. But some of them actually were artists. They weren't just work for hire. They were actually expressing themselves, I guess you'd say, even in a commercial format. But and they're the lineage of our our culture today in comics, and I think that's really important. It blows my mind, Noah. This stuff is just 100, 120 years old, and try to find somebody who's schooled in Opper, who understands Frederic Opper, the most influential cartoonist in the history of the world, in my opinion. Yeah. And most people don't even know who the hell he is. Most people think Rube Goldberg is a device, that you make a YouTube video with, and involving ping pong balls and ramps and chutes and dominoes that knock over. They have no idea he was a real person, much less that he was a great cartoonist. So we've lost this important part of our culture, and it's time to start bringing it back. I think we're in comics history, the next phase of comics history. We had the Bill Blackbeards, the Richard Marshall, do these wonderful collections that identify like the major stars, like Harold Gray and Chester Gould and people like that, Roy Crane, E.C. Segar. But now it's time to start digging further and seeing what we can find, and putting it together. And that was really hard to do in this book that I wrote, because that stuff's not widely available. So I had to really dig. I spent years digging through online archives of newspapers and magazines and just finding little tidbits and collecting them. And then I would have to I'd look at what I had, and I would write out these long outlines and try to construct a timeline of the artist's life, because we have no idea what his life was like. And then, try to write that into a chapter. And then the chapter would be like 3 times longer than I had space for. And here's the part about taking things away to be more artful. I looked at it that way, and just boil it down and try to, can I say this, in a shorter way?
Well, you did a great job. It's a great book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, man, I'm going to let you go. I really appreciate that you gave me this chance to talk to you about your book, and I'm really excited to have a copy.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. I look forward to when we can hang out, even if it's 6 feet apart.